This is your story.
You think it's love, but it's addiction. Why you can't let go. Sometimes we mistake what we feel for love, but when we look more deeply, we realize that what binds us to someone is not genuine connection, it's dependency. And that realization changes everything about how we see the relationship. Today, we're going to explore this distinction. Is it truly love, or is it a form of psychological addiction? People with dependent personality patterns often confuse need with affection. But what they experience is not just the desire to be with someone, it's the overwhelming fear of losing them. For these individuals, the relationship doesn't need to end for distress to begin. The mere possibility of loss is enough to trigger panic, and this internal alarm pulls them back again and again into the same cycle, no matter how harmful it becomes. So how does this cycle work? Why do some people feel drained in a relationship but still find it impossible to leave? This is where neurobiology steps in. The brain's reward system, when exposed to unpredictable reinforcement, reacts just like it does in substance addiction. Okay? Dopamine surges not when the relationship is stable, but when it's uncertain, when your partner is affectionate one day and distant the next. That unpredictability hijacks your brain, drawing you in even deeper. Just like a person addicted to a slot machine that sometimes pays off, but mostly doesn't, right? Dopamine is the molecule of motivation. It drives goal-directed behavior by signaling anticipation and reward, helping your brain decide what's worth your energy and attention. This isn't a matter of conscious choice. It's structural, and that structure is often built in childhood. How we were loved, how we were left, how often we had to earn affection. These early emotional templates follow us into adult relationships. We don't rewrite the story, we replay it over and over, acting out roles we never chose but still feel responsible to perform. It's important, though, not to confuse all emotional bonds with addiction. Not every attachment is unhealthy. In this video, we're going to identify the key differences, understand where this dependency comes from, and explore how to step out of it, okay? Because once you recognize that you're not just holding on to a person, you're trapped in a pattern, that's when freedom begins. That's when healing can start. And that's when love stops feeling like a prison and starts becoming a choice. When you can say, yes, I want to stay with this person. I'm not searching for someone better. Their presence is enough for me. That is what we call secure attachment. It's a relationship grounded in calm acceptance, not comparison. Your partner is not perfect, but you don't look for someone else to fill the gaps. This is what healthy emotional bonding looks like. Quiet confidence without desperation, right? Dependency, on the other hand, is the feeling that you only exist as long as someone else loves you. If their love is present, you feel whole. But if it disappears, that's when the mind creates a dramatic fantasy. I can't live without them. Even though this isn't physically true, you continue to breathe, move, live. The emotional response feels like collapse. A profound emptiness sets in simply from being apart. In psychology, this is known as a dependent personality pattern, and in some ways, it resembles borderline personality structure. A person with borderline traits responds to the possibility of separation with intense anger. The fear of abandonment triggers emotional chaos. They may push their partner away one moment, only to pull them back the next. Their emotional state is volatile, swinging between love and rage, okay? But dependency presents differently. Instead of anger, there's clinging. Instead of fear, there's neediness. These individuals tend to appear quieter, more compliant, more agreeable. They suppress their needs to avoid conflict, allow their boundaries to be crossed, and often sacrifice their identity, all to prevent the other person from leaving. Their internal message is simple. As long as they love me, I am safe. But this is not love. It's a survival strategy. The brain codes the partner's presence as emotional oxygen. And when that oxygen is cut off, panic ensues. What we're looking at here is not mature intimacy, but rather a fragile sense of self that leans on the relationship like a crutch. And unless that self is strengthened, the relationship becomes a place of fear, not freedom.
Don't forget to subscribe.
Dependency means handing over your internal sense of wholeness to someone else. And one of the clearest signs of this dynamic is simple. No matter how damaging the relationship becomes, you can't leave. There's a phrase you've probably heard often. It captures this experience perfectly. I know this is into G for me, but I just can't let go. That sentence is perhaps the most raw definition of a dependent relationship. You might be in a toxic relationship. It wears you down. Even your friends have started pointing out how much it's draining you, but you still can't walk away because your mind whispers, I'd rather endure this pain than be alone. And this is where a critical confusion begins. Pain and love start to blur. At this point, the brain's impulsive attachment system kicks in. Despite the suffering, your mind begins to normalize staying. The relationship no longer feels like a safe harbor. It becomes a familiar zone of pain. And here's the thing. The human brain often prefers the familiar, even if it hurts. Familiarity means predictability, and in the brain's survival algorithm, predictability is always coded as safer. Psychologists describe this as the continuation of behavior even after the expectation of reward is gone. In other words, knowing something is hurting you isn't enough to make you stop, because behavior is not maintained by logic. It's driven by emotional encoding, okay? That's why you need to ask yourself, what does this relationship represent for you? Most of the time, this kind of attachment is an echo of emotional neglect or fear of abandonment from childhood. You may not be clinging to the person themselves, but to the feeling they symbolize when they leave. It's not just your partner you're losing. It's an old wound being reopened, and that's why you can't let go. But this cycle can be broken, and it doesn't start with information. It starts with awareness. Because dependency is not just a behavior, it's a state of consciousness. And once that consciousness shifts, your choices begin to shift too. One of the most critical turning points in a person's developmental journey is the moment of psychological separation. This refers to the process where the individual begins to separate, both physically and emotionally, from the primary caregiver, typically the mother. But how does this separation truly begin? Imagine a child slowly beginning to crawl. For the child, this is more than just movement. It's a revolution. For the first time, they are venturing away from the secure center. This is what we call differentiation. When a child begins to walk, it's not just a motor skill being acquired. It's the early formation of identity, standing upright, engaging with the environment, sensing the power of movement. These experiences initiate a deep sense of self. Pulling a tablecloth, knocking over a glass of water. These are not merely games. They are the child's first experiments in agency. I could cause and effect. But something important happens at this stage. As the child begins to assert their will, not just physically but psychologically, anxiety arises in the caregiver. This is natural. The child is now moving into territory that feels less controllable, and the caregiver's mind begins to generate scenarios. What if they get hurt? What if something goes wrong? If this anxiety is not managed well, it often triggers a suppressive reflex. The parent, in an effort to protect, may begin to impose subtle restrictions. And this is where the child's individuation, the development of their own sense of self, can be disrupted. These restrictions are often not intentional. A child wants to go outside. The parent responds, if you walk out that door, don't ever talk to me again. Or, if you do this, I won't be here. Such language creates a powerful association in the child's mind. If I become myself, I will lose love. And this, right here, is the foundation of dependent personality patterns. The child learns that expressing autonomy may cost them affection, so they begin to suppress their own decisions, waiting instead for approval. This is why so many adult-dependent relationships are actually unresolved extensions of this early developmental stage. The adult is not attached merely to their partner. They are emotionally clinging to the symbolic figure of the caregiver. When that figure is present, they feel safe, okay? When it is gone, anxiety sets in. And here's the critical distinction. If during early development, a person is both loved and allowed to become their own individual, then their future bonds are secure. But if that balance is never achieved, love becomes dependency. Today, I want you to ask yourself a simple but profound question. Were you encouraged as a child? When you made a decision, when you said, this is what I want, was there someone in your life who responded, great, it's your choice. We support you. Or was every decision met with resistance or intervention? Even the smallest preferences, what to wear, who to be friends with, what to eat, were they subject to someone else's approval? This is critical because a person's capacity to make decisions begins in childhood, and the relationships formed with caregivers are the bedrock of this capacity. If a child is encouraged to make their own choices, they gradually develop into a confident, self-reliant individual. But if every decision is overridden, those mental decision-making muscles never fully develop.
Don't forget to subscribe.
In psychology, we call this ego strength or ego integrity, the maturity of the self-structure. If this structure remains underdeveloped, the individual grows up needing another person's energy to function because they've never learned to generate their own. Now, imagine this scene for a moment. A small child, vulnerable and wide-eyed, makes sense of the world through the presence of their mother. When she suddenly disappears, even for a moment, the child's mind fills with one overwhelming thought: I am alone, and this aloneness might destroy me. This is exactly what gets reactivated in adulthood when you experience the intense anxiety or suffocating fear that comes with the thought of losing a partner. Your mind isn't reacting to the present, it's replaying an old script. If they leave, I won't survive. This isn't random. It's the psychological reenactment of your early attachment patterns, what we call in psychology the restaging of attachment trauma. And in that scene, your current partner isn't alone. Standing behind them are your mother, your father, and every caregiving figure who ever directed your life. This is where dependent relationship patterns emerge. The individual becomes someone who cannot make decisions for themselves. So they attach to someone who can offer direction, not just for love, but because they feel lost without that guidance. Over time, this attachment transforms from emotional security into psychological necessity. And here lies the most tragic twist. Most people mistake this dependency for love, but what's really being felt is a deep, almost primal fear of separation. Because to be left is not just to be alone, it is to be directionless, which leads us to a powerful realization. If you're in a relationship, not because you want to be, but because you feel you must be. This isn't love. It's an unresolved wound from childhood, a wound of incomplete individuation, okay? And unless that wound is acknowledged and healed, building a truly healthy relationship is almost impossible. As we continue to explore these relationship dynamics, we need to talk about another powerful theory, learned dependency. Cultural codes within societies significantly shape individuals' perception of their roles in relationships. If a young girl grows up with the message, men should always lead, women must be compliant, understanding, patient, and obedient, then emotional attachment to a man becomes more than love. It becomes an identity, because now the belief is deeply embedded. I am only valuable when I am beside a man. I only exist when I serve him. If he's gone, then who am I? This belief structure prevents a woman from fully expressing her potential, because her very existence has been defined through devotion to another. And that definition is dangerously fragile. When the person she is devoted to disappears, her world collapses. Not just the relationship, but her entire sense of self. At this point, you must ask yourself, does this scenario feel familiar? Because this isn't just a personal issue. It is the result of intergenerational social conditioning. And in order to break free from that conditioning, you first have to become aware of it. That is exactly what we are doing here. Building awareness, and awareness is always the first step toward healing. Now let's move to the third, and perhaps most crucial point. Some individuals experience high levels of anxiety, not just in relationships, but across many areas of life. We call this generalized anxiety disorder. These individuals are in a constant state of internal alarm about work, health, friendships, and future plans. But then there are others whose anxiety is not global, but localized. Their lives are relatively balanced until it comes to romantic relationships. And the moment a partner is involved, the mind flips into panic mode. This is where we must make a critical distinction. If your anxiety is triggered specifically by your partner, this often points toward a dependent personality pattern. Because in this case, what you are experiencing is not just the absence of a person, it's the loss of internal equilibrium. And this imbalance operates like a mental catastrophe. If they're not here, neither am I. I can't live without them. Life is meaningless without them. These aren't just thoughts. They are deeply rooted negative hypnotic scripts you've been repeating to yourself. These scripts likely originated in childhood as deeply held beliefs, then solidified over time through repetition. And now, without realizing it, you reinforce them daily with every fearful inner monologue. This is where you need to pause and ask yourself the most important question. How can I free myself from this thought? Pay attention. Saying I can't live without them is a statement of finality, but asking how can I live without them is the beginning of a search, and only those who search will find. So here's my recommendation. Stop treating your thoughts as permanent truths. Start treating them as evolving processes. Don't command your mind, question it, because questions unlock the mind, and an unlocked mind begins the journey of transformation. Okay? Now, let's move on to the second core concept. This is one of the mind's most deceptive tricks. An intense emotional reaction to a catastrophe that hasn't even happened. No proof, just fear. Let's walk through a classic example. One of my clients comes in with a severe fear of dogs. I ask, how scared are you of dogs? The answer is instant, 11 out of 10. A starred 10. So I ask, how many times have you been bitten? Never. Has anyone close to you been attacked? No. Did you see something on TV? Maybe. I don't remember, but I'm terrified. Now, let's pause and look at what's happening here. This fear recent responds to an actual threat. It's a mental reaction to an imagined scenario. There is no physical evidence, yet the person is already living the emotional pain of a possible trauma, one that hasn't occurred and likely never will. Now, bring this into your relationship. There may not even be a breakup. Maybe there's just the possibility of separation. And yet you begin mentally playing out the ending. You feel the loss, the panic, the abandonment, not when it happens, but long before it does. That's what psychologists call emotional catastrophizing, okay? And it's one of the foundational traits of a dependent relationship dynamic. So let's now shift to the third idea. A psychological challenge you're going to apply to yourself. Yes, you heard that right. A challenge. And let's be honest, we love challenges. Thanks to social media, we've all become wired for short-term goals and daily wins. So why not use that to your advantage? To this point, we're not training your muscles, we're rewiring your nervous system. Let's say you call or message your partner 10 times a day. Your first challenge, cut that number down to 5. Once you've done that successfully, bring it down to 3. If you ask to meet them 4 times a week, make it 3 or even 2. And in the time you free up, invest in your own friendships. Return to your hobbies. Reconnect with yourself. Each time you succeed, your brain gets the message. I'm still here. I'm still breathing, even without them. And every time that happens, new neural pathways begin to form. Slowly but surely, those old dependency circuits weaken. And that's when something powerful happens. You start to reclaim your inner strength. Over time, your brain begins to realize something fundamental. Life does not revolve around one single person. And this is a moment of neuroscientific clarity because your prefrontal cortex, the decision-making center, finally speaks up. It says, I existed before they came into my life. You were breathing, thinking, laughing, making plans. So why does it suddenly feel like life only began with them? This is called a neurological distortion, cognitive illusion. The mind, when overwhelmed by emotion, tends to center that emotion's source as the core of your existence. But it's just that, an illusion, okay? This intense focus hijacks the brain's predictive machinery. It fuels thoughts like, I can't live without them. I'll never be happy again, or nothing has meaning without them. These aren't facts. They're unproven beliefs. And here's the critical reminder. A belief is not the same as reality. A belief is just a thought, and thoughts can change, okay? Once you become aware of this, your limbic system, especially the amygdala, your internal alarm, begins to settle. Because now your brain starts to reintegrate, the emotional and logical centers begin to reconnect. And in that moment, you regain regulation over yourself. So yes, life without them is possible. And that's not just a rational statement. It's a biological fact. The brain adapts, the heart heals. Your sense of identity reforms. And with each step you take out of the illusion, you return closer to your authentic self. If what you heard today felt familiar or spoke to something inside you, I encourage you to share your thoughts in the comments. Someone else might read your words and find healing in them too. Just know, on this channel, you are not alone. And if this content has been helpful for you, don't forget to subscribe, because here we grow stronger together.